Any opposition to unanimous approval? Seeing none, we approve consent.
Thank you. And that takes us to item 16A, and Cassidy Teufel will give the staff presentation on this item. Cassidy is your staff expert on aquaculture.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Item 16A is a consistency certification submitted by KZO SeaFarms to install and operate a 100-acre shellfish aquaculture facility. The facility would be placed approximately 8 miles offshore of the Los Angeles and Orange County coastlines, making it the first aquaculture facility proposed to be located in federal waters offshore of California. The facility would be maintained between 20 and 30 feet below the water surface and would be comprised of a series of ropes, lines, and cables held horizontally in the water column by a network of surface buoys and bottom anchors. It would be dedicated primarily to the cultivation and harvest of a non-native species, the Mediterranean mussel. I have a couple slides that I'll flip through really quickly to show you the location and configuration of the facility. So here's the location. I noted the 2 of the 4 oil platforms that are located approximately, the nearest one is located approximately a half mile from the facility. As you can see, the large area there is called the San Pedro Shelf, and extends, the oil platforms are located near the shelf boundary, and it extends from a depth of a few feet in nearshore waters to roughly 200 feet at the shelf break. Here's a rough schematic of the design of the facility. As you can see, it would be held at the surface by a series of buoys and on the seafloor by anchors, and held in the water column itself. And hanging from the lateral system of lines would be a series of ropes used to seed oysters, or seed mussels, and grow them out for harvest. Additionally, there would be a small number of oysters and scallops that would be grown on one of the 39 proposed, or 40 proposed long lines. Over the past year, Commission staff has worked to evaluate and address this project's potential adverse impacts, and is engaged in this effort with the applicant, interested parties including commercial and recreational fishing organizations, and resource management agencies such as the Army Corps of Engineers, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Through the course of this process, the applicant reduced the size of the project roughly tenfold, from over 1,000 acres to 100 acres, resited it to a location farther offshore, and modified the use of anchoring devices to minimize the seafloor footprint. Notwithstanding these changes, there remains the potential for significant marine resource impacts. For example, potential impacts such as entanglement of marine mammals and wildlife, release of marine debris, alteration of seafloor habitat, loss of fishing grounds, and spread of non-native species are known to occur at some level with similar types of aquaculture facilities in other areas of the U.S. and abroad. Because the proposed project is the first of its kind proposed in California's offshore waters, however, uncertainty exists about its potential impacts and their severity. To address this uncertainty, your staff developed a variety of robust protective and monitoring measures that the applicant has committed to implement. These measures, detailed in the staff report and addendum as conditions 1 through 13, are designed to ensure that any impacts that do occur are observed, recorded, and brought to the Commission's attention in a timely manner. Key to this approach is the applicant's commitment to develop and submit for Executive Director review and approval a comprehensive independent monitoring program. This program would be implemented for the first 5 years of the aquaculture facility's operation, and includes 8 specific elements ranging from filtration of seawater and release of reproductive material from the cultivated shellfish to changes in commercial and recreational fishing activities at and around the project site. The details of the monitoring program requirement were developed in consultation with the Commission staff ecologist, Dr. John Dixon. In addition, the applicant has committed to incorporate implementation of marine wildlife entanglement minimization measures, development and implementation of a marine debris management program, development and implementation of a plan for the timely and complete removal of the facility upon project termination, establishment of a financial surety device to ensure that such removal is carried out completely, and development and implementation of a compensation plan to address the potential loss or damage of fishing gear that accidentally comes into contact with the facility. With implementation of these mitigation measures, the Commission staff believes the project will be carried out consistent with the enforceable policies of California's Coastal Management Program. I note, however, that Commission staff will monitor closely the operation of this facility and the results of the monitoring effort. If at any time we believe the project is not being carried out consistent with the enforceable policies of California's Coastal Management Program, for example, the observation of a significant impact not anticipated at this time, the Commission can reopen consistency review and either require project modifications or object to the facility's continued operations. Included in your addendum packet and as a handout I provided this morning are 7 letters, including a letter from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and 5 letters of opposition to the project from Heal the Bay, Ocean Conservancy, Orange County Coastkeeper, Los Angeles Waterkeeper, and Ocean Defenders Alliance. We addressed a number of the recommendations and concerns raised in these letters in the proposed addendum changes, including changes that make the conditions more robust and comprehensive, which the applicant is committed to implement. But I also wanted to comment on a couple of additional issues raised in this correspondence. First, there are concerns about planting and harvesting non-native species and the possible spread of these species to areas outside of cultivation, including marine protected areas. Although the primary species proposed to be grown, the Mediterranean mussel, is considered an invasive species, surveys carried out in California during the mid-1980s showed that it had been present and highly abundant throughout central and southern California since at least that time and likely since the 1940s. In fact, since the 1990s, the Mediterranean mussel has been considered to be the most abundant mussel species in the bays and estuaries of Southern California. This well-documented abundance and several decades-long period of establishment suggests that Mediterranean mussels have invaded and become permanently established in Southern California. The cultivation of this species is therefore not expected to further contribute to this situation or result in adverse impacts. The applicant also proposes to cultivate a more limited number of non-native Pacific oysters. This species is commonly grown in aquaculture operations and has been cultivated at a facility permitted by the Commission in Carlsbad's Agua Hedionda Lagoon since approximately 1990. Traditionally, the water temperatures and oceanographic conditions in California have been thought to impede the reproduction of Pacific oysters, but in recent years it has been found outside of cultivation in a wide variety of habitats, from at least San Diego to Los Angeles Harbor. This recent evidence of the apparent initial stages of naturalization suggests that conditions may be changing to allow this species to more firmly become established in the wild. However, several aspects of the proposed project are expected to reduce the number of viable Pacific oyster larvae potentially released from this facility that would be able to settle in coastal areas. These factors include the facility's proposed distance from shore, the more limited number of oysters proposed to be cultivated, the water temperatures and salinities at the cultivation depths, and most importantly, the applicant's exclusive use of less reproductively robust triploid oysters. While these factors are anticipated to result in few, if any, viable oyster larvae arriving at the mainland coast, the applicant has also committed to carry out a thorough monitoring of the production of eggs and larvae from the shellfish cultivated at the facility, as well as the regional dispersion of this reproductive material and its potential contribution to the presence, persistence, and expansion of populations outside of cultivation. Excuse me. The results of this evaluation will be provided to the Commission for each of the first 5 years of operation, and if these results suggest that the facility is acting as a significant source of viable reproductive material, the Commission can reopen consistency review and either require project modifications or object to the facility's operations. Again, we believe with implementation of the conditions recommended by staff, the project will be carried out consistent with the enforceable policies of the California Coastal Management Program. Because the applicant is committed to include all of these conditions as part of its project, we have changed the staff recommendation from a conditional concurrence to concurrence. Page 1 of the addendum for this agenda item includes the modified motion and resolution language. With that, I'll conclude the staff presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Cassidy. Do we have any ex partes on this item? Seeing none, I see no speaker cards for anyone, applicant or otherwise. Oh, we do have. I have one too. I will shortly see some speaker cards. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have one on file, but I'm good.
Oh, please. Thank you. You have an ex parte on file? Thank you. I'm just looking to see if we have. Okay. I don't have any card from the applicant here, so if there is no representative from the applicant, oh, there is, please.
Yeah, we understand that they did fill out a speaker slip.
Okay.
Do
Please
you
come
have it
forward.
there?
No, I gave it.
Okay.
That's okay. If you just, we'll make sure we get one. If you please come forward at this time. State your name and we'll welcome you. How much time would you like to have?
Very short, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay.
I am Philip Kruger, president of KZO SeaFarms. I'm proud to say that our company's management has a reputation and a record of embracing technology solutions for improving the marine environment. 2 years ago, our nonprofit, KZO Education, 501c3 nonprofit, started and led a oyster restoration project in Alamitos Bay. Also, we are working with NOAA to document and also to measure the filtration capability of bivalves. It's called bivalve bioextraction. Tremendous potential for cleaning the water columns in the bays and estuaries of Southern California. Also, nearly 2 years ago, we developed an offshore mariculture monitoring program by partnering with leading scientific institutions, which include University of Southern California, the Wrigley Institute of Environmental Sciences, and Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and others. We have a team of talented PhDs with marine biology expertise to advise and guide us to be responsible stewards of the sea. We have been working diligently with the coastal staff to strengthen our monitoring program for rigorously and transparently monitoring any impact of our project. This proposed project, located over 7 miles offshore from California's coastline, will produce the science-based data for the advancement of sustainable offshore shellfish aquaculture to put a small dent in our nation's $10 billion seafood deficit. Its amazing factoid is that the United States annually imports over 33 million pounds of live mussels, most of them from Prince Edward Island in Canada. Think if California, we could grow our own and save that 3,500 air miles of carbon footprint. We believe this project is in our state and national public interest. It will reduce our dependency on imports, create jobs, and expand our economy in a clean and environmentally sustainable way while also preserving working waterfronts. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have your card, so thank you very much. Next, I'll ask Ken Frank from Sport Fishing Association, followed by Dana Murray. Okay. Dana?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Dana Murray. I'm a marine and coastal scientist with Heal the Bay. I also have 3 extra minutes ceded to me by Susan Jordan. It should be there. Before I start, I wanted to clarify that both Heal the Bay, although we share some of the sentiments of other environmental NGOs that are opposed to this project, we are not here in opposition of the project. We just have some major concerns with it. As you've heard, the proposed KZO SeaFarms operation would be the first permitted offshore aquaculture project to exist off the coast of California. And I anticipate that more will come before you in the near future. So it's imperative that this precedent-setting project include a comprehensive and long-term monitoring program in addition to conditions that attempt to make the project less damaging to our shared coastal resources. I'm encouraged and thankful for the work your staff has done to improve the project, but there are still 4 main areas that we're very concerned about. The first one is regarding invasive species. Many environmental groups are completely against any non-native species being cultivated in our oceans. However, I recognize that the Mediterranean mussels are already well established in California. However, Pacific oysters are not. In fact, there's evidence that cultivation of non-native Pacific oysters in estuaries in San Diego and in Washington state have contributed to expansion of this potentially invasive species to nearby waters. Do we want to risk spreading this non-native species in LA's waters when native species such as the Olympia oyster could be cultivated instead? In fact, as part of the suite of species that the applicant has submitted, there are native Olympia oysters in that suite. There might be issues with some of the restoration efforts that have been done to restore Olympia oysters, because my understanding is that Pacific oysters can outcompete our native oyster. The second issue is with entanglement. Again, I appreciate the efforts made by staff to try to minimize the impacts there. However, as we state in our comment letter, we suggest more frequent visual inspections than once a month. We feel that once a month visual inspection of the lines will be more to just document what there is there at the moment. There might be animals that have become entangled and died that haven't been documented. So we request more frequent visual inspections. In addition, there's video monitoring that has been mentioned in the report, and we request that there be some kind of specificity with how often those videos are monitored. So if there are opportunities for rescue of dolphins or gray whales or seabirds, that through video monitoring, those opportunities can be identified. The third topic is a bit related to entanglement. It has to do with storm damage. As you guys know, living in California, sometimes we have some pretty big swells and storms, and this being sited about 8 miles off the coast, we could anticipate that maybe some of the infrastructure and lines might get damaged. So we believe that there should be a trigger for triggering visual inspections of the facility and all the lines within 24 hours of a major storm event or a big swell. And then if they identify any gear that's been lost, that be reported, and if any gear is damaged, that it be repaired immediately. This goes with we don't want to create more marine debris in our oceans, and especially some of our local species, cetaceans, sea turtles, seabirds, have been known to get caught in gear like this. Regarding the monitoring plan, I'm very glad to see that this got inserted recently into the project. This being the first project like this, and possibly a pilot project that I believe the applicant wants to expand to much larger, I think it's imperative that we are monitoring almost every aspect of this project. I appreciate the areas that are being monitored. However, I think that 5 years of monitoring is too short and that there shouldn't be a limit on it. There is no limit to this project. There's a limited lifespan at this point, so I feel like that the monitoring should be consistent with that. I do appreciate that there will be review in 5 years to see if the project goes on, it can be reopened, but I feel like for now the monitoring program should mirror the lifespan of the project. In conclusion, ideally siting for these offshore aquaculture projects should be considered cumulatively and in the best sites possible. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that we're there yet, so we're really looking to you guys, the California Coastal Commission, to help guide the future of offshore aquaculture while working with your partner agencies in a way that protects our coastal resources, as you guys are our coastal stewards. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Seekich.
Good afternoon, Chair Kinsey and Commissioners. My name is Sarah Sikich. I'm actually the Science and Policy Director for Heal the Bay, and that's usually the capacity in which I speak before you. You've heard from my colleague Dana already, and I'm here today to speak for Ocean Conservancy because they could not be here at the hearing As you know, they're a national organization dedicated to ocean protection, and they've worked extensively on setting marine protected areas in California as well as fisheries issues here. They did submit a letter. I don't believe it made the addendum, but I think you have a copy. It was submitted by Ocean Conservancy's Chief Scientist George Leonard and Pacific Program Director Samantha Murray, I believe yesterday afternoon. You may have gotten it this morning. Just to summarize their comments, Ocean Conservancy believes that aquaculture holds great promise to meet the protein demands of a growing population, but that it's imperative that it's done in an environmentally and socially responsible manner. Also, to clarify, they're not opposed to this project, but they do have some concerns and believe that some additional work on the conditions could alleviate those concerns. In March of 2011, Ocean Conservancy published a white paper entitled Right from the Start, Open Ocean Aquaculture in the U.S., which documents the risks of open ocean aquaculture and recommends a number of standards and practices to ensure that best practices are used in U.S. aquaculture. Unfortunately, they believe that this proposal falls short of some of those goals. We recognize that the Coastal Commission has limited capacity given and authority given that this is a consistency determination for federal permits, but there are some things that could be done. The first is in relation to the species farmed, supporting Dana Murray's comments earlier today. Ocean Conservancy believes that the mussels are understandable. They're already well colonized here, but that Pacific oyster should not be allowed. Instead, the Olympia oyster, which is a native species to California waters, should be allowed on this particular operation. As well, they encourage the Commission to ensure that conditions are included that hold the applicant liable for any environmental damages that are unintentional but may be caused by this facility, as well as full removal of the facility at the end of its operational life. It's being treated as a pilot facility right now. Operations have been scaled back for this permit to, I think, from 1,000 acres to 100 acres, but it's clear that the applicant is interested in scaling up the facility if this pilot project is functional and works well. And although this is currently proposed as a pilot project, it's precedent setting, so that must be kept in mind. Unfortunately, we're in a situation right now where there isn't a full-scale siting and best siting practices set for California on aquaculture, so you're in a predicament where you have to permit this, but that would be the preferred mechanism, and it should be on your radar that SB 201, which Ocean Conservancy helped support California's Sustainable Oceans Act in 2006, would set those standards, and the programmatic EIR is going to be developed soon. I think it's out any day now for really looking at best siting and best practices for aquaculture offshore. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bring it back to staff. Any final comments?
Just a couple of comments, Commissioners. There was the request made to require that after a storm that they inspect the facility within 24 hours. That is something that we agreed to, and I understand the applicant agrees to do that too. In the staff report, there's a condition 12, which is requiring a marine debris management plan. We were going to require that in the context of reviewing that to make sure that that's a part of that plan. And that's how we were going to handle it. But we understand that's not an issue with the applicant, and then they agreed to that. That makes sense. Just factually, there was the request to prohibit Pacific oysters. Pacific oysters happens to be the #1 species that is planted and harvested in California, and the Commission has routinely approved other facilities along the coast of California. And that's all I have at this time, unless Cassidy wants to make some additional comments.
Just a couple quick points. Another one of the recommendations that Heal the Bay provided was more frequent entanglement monitoring. We included in the conditions a recommendation for monthly monitoring, recognizing that with approximately 40,000 linear feet of line and cables, as well as 84 anchors that would need to be video monitored or monitored with scuba, that it would likely take a number of days, possibly weeks, to carry that out, and so that operationally that monitoring would be carried out over the course of a month and not just done in one single effort. And so we completely agree with the need to have frequent entanglement monitoring to address that issue, but we think that's integrated into our recommendation already. I also wanted to quickly address the point about scaling up and note that any expansion or additional facilities of this kind would require additional federal permits and prompt commission review as well.
Thank you. Sir, I don't have a card. Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm Ken Frankie. I apologize. I was late getting here.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, there should be a card.
Yes, we do have a card here. Yes, if you'd like to make some comments, that would be fine.
Yes, if I could. My name's Ken Frankie. I'm president of the Sport Fishing Association of California. We represent 165 commercial passenger vessel companies in Southern California and transport about 1 million people a year out here locally. I'm also here representing the Wetfish Association, which is the commercial fishing association that works along the coast here. And comments that we wanted to make is it's a busy ocean right there. There's a lot of activity 24 hours a day. We have sand bass stocks that operate or that are in that area, which are a real concern to us. And bottom line is the viewpoint of the captains and the owners of the fleet that work in that area every day is that there needs to be some better thought into the location. It is just a very, very busy area, and even though it says it's 100 acres, and we're not against aquaculture. Aquaculture is a good thing when done appropriately. Our concern is, when it's the middle of the night and people are putting out anchors, or a commercial fisherman is putting out a set of gear and he's got weather and they're drifting along, we potentially end up with makings of a disaster if that equipment gets wrapped into this aquaculture site. So recommendation of the owners is that there be more thought into where to place this. We have Newport Beach, Huntington Beach area there, Long Beach, and Los Angeles, all with fleets that really depend on these areas. And as you know, many of the areas they typically could fish in the past are no longer permitted at. So we respectfully recommend that actually the organizer of this go back to the drawing board and find somewhere a little bit better to locate it without so much maritime traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will come back to staff again, just as it relates to any comments the last speaker made. Mr. Frankie?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to note, in the staff report, there's an alternatives analysis that discusses the different sites that were evaluated. I personally worked closely with Ken, as well as Diane Pleshner-Steele of the California Wetfish Producers Association. The applicant did as well, to try and completely understand their concerns and work to find a site that would alleviate those concerns. While they obviously remain in opposition to the project, the site that is currently proposed is located in much closer proximity to the existing oil platforms and some existing infrastructure in the San Pedro Shelf. And that was done specifically to address the concerns of the commercial and recreational fishing community. As I understand it, that area, because there's existing infrastructure out there that also poses a threat to some of the set gear and fishing practices, that being in closer proximity to that infrastructure limits the new area that would essentially be closed to fishing activity. And so that was done to alleviate that issue. I also wanted to note that in the discussions with the commercial and recreational fishermen, there was an interest that the facility be placed even closer, literally adjacent to some of those oil platforms. That is not feasible for a number of reasons, not the least of which is a federal requirement that imposes a safety zone of 500 meters around each of those facilities. So while it's not adjacent to them at a distance of a half mile, it's pretty much as close as you can get without causing issues to their operations as well as navigation.
Thank you. Allison?
Just one more comment. I noticed some puzzled faces during Cassidy's presentation where he mentioned at the end that we're actually recommending a substitute motion and resolution. I just wanted to explain again the reason why is that we had recommended a series of conditions, and after the staff report was published, the applicant agreed to actually incorporate all of these requirements, including what we have in the addendum, as a part of their project description. And so because of that, we're changing the motion to say to drop out the word conditionally. We're now recommending that you concur. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission then and begin with Commissioner Bochco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gosh, Madam Chair, that's what I'm getting used to. Okay, I must say I feel much better about this project now that I've heard from staff and talked to Allison in particular about certain issues, particularly the consistency procedures versus permit procedures. So I would like, just on the record from staff, an answer that what happens if we find that there are some entanglements and other issues that we're monitoring for? What is our procedure? What is our ability to stop that from happening?
Sure.
Well, there is a regulation, or a federal consistency regulation under the Coastal Zone Management Act that allows for remedial action for previously reviewed activities. So in this case, if the Commission were to concur in this, if at any point we determine that this activity is being conducted in a way that's having a substantially different effect on a coastal use or resource, that the Commission could reopen it, and that you could do a number of things. You could require modifications to the project, or you could decide that this project is no longer being carried out consistent with the program, and you could object to it.
Okay, and there's two words that are interesting to me: substantial, which is always open to interpretation. I mean, is that one whale? Is that, 3 whales? Is it 4? How do we decide what is substantial? Is that just our own judgment?
I think that's our own judgment.
Okay.
But yes, if there was I believe we would all agree, if there was an entanglement, we would consider that to be substantial.
Substantial. Okay. And we can object to it, but that doesn't amount to a revocation, or does it amount to a revocation?
If this came back to the Commission and you objected to it, then they would have to stop the operation.
Okay, thank you. What is the operational life? We keep talking about them removing it at the end of the operational life. Does it have a life?
I think that's a question maybe best directed to the applicant.
Would you mind, sir?
Please state your name for the record as well.
Yeah, Phil Kruger with KZO SeaFarms. Yes, our business plan calls for 6 years. That's really to get a good return on investment for the investors. But the depreciable life is about 10 years on the equipment. But there is, with the Army Corps of Engineers permit, it's really a building permit. So there is no termination pursuant to the federal permit with the Army Corps of Engineers.
I see. So the Army Corps' permit is with no end to it.
That's correct.
Okay. And back to staff, if the 6 years passes and they have to do substantial renovation, I'm now thinking more on a permit basis, I guess. The ropes are tired or whatever equipment is now wearing out. Do they have to come back for another?
Yeah, if they make changes to the project, they'd have to come back.
They have to come back. So it is somewhat like a permit then. Okay, good. Thank you, sir. That's very nice.
Commissioner Schallenberg?
Nope, I'm not done.
Oh, you're not done?
No, I just didn't want him to have to stand there the whole time. Somebody was mentioning the whole idea of surveying offshore to find the best locations, and we've had this conversation quite frequently with DSAL. What is the likelihood of that happening? Is it in progress? Is this something that, again, we should be looking towards an overall plan before we pick one project?
I think you're talking about marine spatial planning?
Yeah.
As far as I know, there's no effort to do that kind of thing here.
All right.
There doesn't tend to be money for this right now for any of these offshore project types.
Got you. And in terms of the monitoring, I mean, I understand that it's not really once a month because it takes a number of days or weeks to actually peruse all of the different ropes and whatnot. But you keep mentioning video, and video is something that can go all the time. Once a camera is in place, you can just run it all the time. It's just high-def video. So is part of this video monitoring a permanent camera that if there's someone on shore watching, they can see at all times what's going on in the project?
I think it's an intriguing idea. I've thought about it. It's been raised in a number of the comment letters. I don't see how that could operationally be effective without dozens, if not hundreds, of cameras, just due to the water clarity and the distance you can see underwater. You would have to have a camera every 20 feet or so to be monitoring the entire facility underwater. To watch it above water is a possibility, but that would require additional infrastructure above water. Currently, the only surface footprint, so to speak, are going to be the small buoys that are holding the lines in place. And so, in my mind, I didn't really see an effective way of accomplishing that.
Because video cameras are really small and they're very cheap. Now, I don't know about underwater ones. I should probably. Could the applicant? Could you? Thank you, sir. You know about this stuff.
Yes, we have a plan to do the video monitoring. First of all, we'll be out there every other day. It's 8 miles from our headquarters, which is based at Southern California Marine Institute. If there's any problem, it behooves us to go out there and repair it. So it will not be abandoned for over 2-3 days. We'll be out there constantly. With respect to monitoring, beyond the conditions that we agreed to with the commission, we're going way beyond that. There are so many research institutions, including Mabari, Lockheed Martin. They all want to be involved because this is a pioneering project. So they are volunteering. They want to be involved with this. So it'll be the most monitored program in order to gather that data for the advancement of offshore aquaculture.
Could you excuse me, if I might, just we don't have a recorder. I'm sorry, you're looking right here, Chair. Just restate your name each time you are asked a question.
Philip Kruger, KZO SeaFarms.
Thank you very much.
So I'm so glad you said that because part of the reason we were unsure in the staff report about some of the effects on marine life was because so many other projects are so much smaller. So the idea would be that this 100-acre size would actually give you information that could be useful in the future in predicting what is either dangerous or not dangerous to the marine life.
Absolutely, and for international, for the amount of research that's gone on in the San Pedro Shelf is just phenomenal. In fact, Mabari will be down in April. They're talking about a fleet of underwater vehicles. They're called flyers, and they could pick up signatures acoustically of fish life. The data that we'll be able to collect over the next couple of years will be it'll go way beyond the requirements that the commission has asked us to do.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you. Okay, one more question for staff, and then I'm done. Thank you so much. Whale migration. We've all been aware of the last few days that there's a whole change in the pattern of whale migration. The scientists don't know why, but there's lots of them together, and they're taking some different paths. Do we have any idea how this site relates to any whale migration patterns in the past or likely in the future? And just as a second part of that question, is there going to, it sounds like there's a lot of monitoring period, but the idea of during the whale migration season, when we can kind of predict when they're going to be out there, is there any specific kind of monitoring that we're doing that for that particular mammals, you know what I'm saying, behavior?
With respect to migration, I assume you're talking about the California gray whale.
Yeah.
On page 26 of the staff report, figure 2 is a figure that was provided by the National Marine Fisheries Service that shows the approximate location of the gray whale migratory pathways in the Southern California Bight, which is roughly the area from Point Conception to the border. As you can see, if you look at that figure, it's a network of fingers, and the lighter areas are the migratory pathways. So it's not the situation where you have further up the coast where you have the gray whales in fairly close proximity to the shoreline in fairly discrete areas. In the Southern California Bight, they're much more dispersed. And it changes based on whether or not it's a southern or northern migration. If they have the mother and calf pairs, are migrating in different areas than they are when they're by themselves, heading down to the lagoons in Baja. So the facility would be in the general area of gray whale migration. That's definitely true. But the whales are migrating in many areas in that region. One of you also asked about if there are going to be specific measures during the whale migratory season. One thing to consider is that there are also blue and fin whales that are common to this area, a number of other whale species that come during periods of time that don't necessarily correspond to when the gray whales are migrating. So I think it's safe to say that there are whales out there throughout the year, and that it would be important to have the same degree of monitoring throughout the year, regardless of time, and so that's what our conditions intended.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Schallenberger?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I recognize that aquaculture is an essential part of our future in producing adequate protein to feed the world. So I think that we need to move forward with it, and we need to do it as expeditiously as possible and as cautiously as possible, because the risks of doing it wrong, the risks of making a mistake, are disastrous. So I appreciate very, very much KZO SeaFarms for their cooperative work with staff. It is quite a wonderful thing to see something go from concurrence with conditions to full concurrence, a finding of consistency, and I really, really appreciate that. I have one concern, however, remaining, because I think that between staff and the SeaFarms, they've done just about everything they can to be sure that it's adequately monitored and we know what's happening, and in a way that we usually don't have, as Commissioner Bochco pointed out, a way to bring it back to us if things do go wrong. I have one concern, and that is this monitoring program I just love this, I have to write it down. After 5 years, to be sure that there's not a significant source of viable reproductive material having escaped from the sea farm, as I understand it. And again, the risks, I'm very uncomfortable with this because of the risks. If we pollute our oceans with any more invasive species, non-native species, it just will work so fast toward the unraveling of that ecosystem. On the other hand, as I started off saying, I recognize that we need to go down this path. So and we also know that the environment of the ocean is changing. The water temperature is changing. We have El Niños, we have El Niños. As Commissioner Bochco has said, the pattern, the behavior of whales this year seems to be different. So to have the monitoring program end in 5 years is not enough for me. I need it to be a monitoring program for the life of the project. And I would like to ask the representative again, I'm sorry to keep making you jump up, from KZO SeaFarms. I'm assuming this wouldn't be much of a hardship for you, since your business plan already has that this is probably a 6-year project as you're seeing it. Would you be willing to incorporate into your project not the 5-year monitoring, but for the life of the project?
We would welcome it, because
Thank you.
Even though we have it for 6 years, we're going to continue. It's in our budget.
Thank you. That's awesome. And if you'd put your name on the record so we know it was you that saying that.
Philip Kruger, KZO SeaFarms. May I say something else too?
Actually, no. I'm afraid this isn't a time for a public testimony. Anyway, thank you very much. With that, I can fully feel cautiously comfortable with supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. I move that the Commission concur with KZO SeaFarms Consistency Certification CC-035-12 that the project described would be consistent with the enforceable policies of the California Coastal Management Program, and would be conducted in a manner consistent with that program, and I'm recommending a yes vote.
Motion by Garcia, second by Schallenberger. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Just that I think this is an interesting, very thoughtful project. I think staff has done a great job of working with the applicant on bringing this to a place where I think is going to be really a benefit, I think, for everyone. It's a win-win, so I think it's an exciting project.
Would you like to speak to your second?
Only to once again thank the KZO SeaFarms for being so constructive and so sensitive about the protection of our oceans. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners Groom, followed by McClure, then Zimmer, then Brennan.
Thank you. I still had some questions. Most of them were answered with Commissioner Bacho's comments, but the in other oyster farms, other mussel farms that we have approved or that we have had anything to do with, are the safety procedures, are they as stringent as these are? I mean, can you help me with that?
But can I have you clarify safety procedures for entanglement, or?
Well, all of the above. I mean, like everyone else, I'm concerned about the quality of the ocean, but also, we have a project in another part of the state that is troubled, and I want to make sure that this is far more stringent than anything that happened on that project or other projects like it.
I'll say that because this is really the first of its kind that we've seen in the offshore environment, the conditions that we developed and that the applicant will be implementing are different than anything the Commission has done in the past. Okay. And I think that's partly because of the unique nature of the project and partly because we haven't had another project of this scale come before the Commission in quite a number of years, and so science has developed and changed in some ways as well.
Okay, and I'm pleased that you'll do the monitoring for the life of the project. I think that makes a lot of sense. The applicant stated that they will be visiting it on a regular basis, that those are not, and that they will have this, that was not something that's in the in our staff report. Will that be included? And the motion's already been made, but he said that he would visit it. They would be visiting it at least every other day, so I'd like to make sure that that's included in our approval.
In the project description section of the report, I think page 7 or 8, it notes the frequency which they'll be visiting for harvest maintenance type activities, and it does note that frequency of several times per week.
Several times per week is different than every other day for me.
Absolutely.
Those are your comments? Yes. Then Commissioner McClure, and followed by Zimmer.
Yes, thank you. I have almost all of my concerns have been alleviated, but in the staff report where it talks about the MPAs, and we know that the MPAs are fairly far away, but then when the description goes about how the larvae can be transmitted and float, and that there is a proposal that there will be an adaptive management plan if by chance these mussels get away from the farm. My concern is that it doesn't appear that there's an analysis of how many of these Mediterranean mussels are in those MPAs. We call it out that we're making an assumption that there are some there, because I would like to see that there be an analysis before this goes in, so we have data on what we are saying we're going to protect. If there's we survey how many mussels are in these MPAs now, then in a year when that report is made, we can actually see if there has been an issue with the MPAs being negatively impacted. And so I don't see any protection there. And I would like, for me to be able to support this, I'm going to need to see that level of protection. And is there a mitigation plan if all of a sudden this becomes a big mistake? Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't find that in there, because I know that, you know, right now if you take a boat and put it in water in the ocean in Oregon and you take it back out, you have to go through a whole process of washing it because of the invasive little shellfish that are there. I mean, and it happened in a blink. So I had concerns with that, and I have concerns that we don't have the base data. So I don't know if there's a way we can get base data.
To respond to your first question, I think that's something that can be integrated into the existing monitoring program that will be developed and submitted for our review and approval. That program, subpart M, discusses an evaluation of regional dispersion of the reproductive material from the cultivated oysters, as well as its contribution to the regional presence, persistence, and expansion of populations. And so in my mind, an integral part of that will be an assessment of the baseline conditions to see how and if those change.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Yeah, other than the reopener and removal of the facility and cessation of operations, there isn't any other type of mitigation that's.
I guess I'm asking that question because even, you know, in most trades there's at least a bond of some kind that you hold to, you know, to protect your impact on other people.
Commissioner Zimmer, then Brennan and Cox.
Did staff have a response to the last question on the bond? There was a reference to $100,000 security somewhere in this, but it doesn't sound like it would cover.
Yeah, I think that was to ensure removal.
Yeah. Okay.
For the rest of it, other than legal liability and lawsuits and those types of things to address issues or damages, there isn't anything integrated into our conditions or recommendation.
Okay, so on to my comments, and this may be just a matter of clarification, but the addendum, the language that's been added relating to the marine protected areas, I think is very useful, and I'm assuming is intended to respond to some of the public concerns. But in the letters from the various organizations, I think they were also asking for an opportunity for public access to the monitoring reports annually, and is that now included?
They would be public when they're submitted.
They're public documents.
They're public documents.
Yeah, okay. And then this last sentence that was added that reflects that if there is a release of reproductive material from the mussels having unanticipated effects, including effects on marine protected areas, KZO will implement adaptive management strategies, project modifications, or operational changes to address these effects. And so on that point, there's a question as to what the procedure is. Is this using the word will implies that whatever the executive director decides is an appropriate adaptive strategy or modification, that they're agreeing to do it? Is that how you understand that phrase?
I believe so. I'm not
sure. Is that
sure
how they understand?
Entirely, I understand your question.
Well, I'm trying